They laughed when she showed up, lip balm in her pocket, mascara barely faded from basic training. To them, she was just another pretty face with no idea what real grit looked like. So they handed her a clipboard and told her to observe. But when the team went dark during the mission, radio silence, no backup, she didn't wait. She didn't flinch. She geared up, recalculated the evac route, and stepped into hostile territory alone. 10 minutes later, every SEAL on that mission was accounted for because of her, and the only sound left was the silence of every man who had doubted her. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that showcase how real courage emerges when everything seems impossible, consider subscribing for more content that explores the extraordinary strength hidden within ordinary moments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete expanse of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Michelle Torres first stepped through the gates of SEAL Team 6 headquarters. At 0530 hours, the base hummed with the quiet intensity that preceded major operations. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the chain-link perimeter, its waves providing a constant backdrop of sound that had become as familiar as breathing to the warriors who called this place home. Torres moved with measured steps across the compound, her service record folder clutched against her regulation dress blues, approaching the imposing steel doors of the Special Operations Command Center. The morning air carried the scent of salt water mixed with diesel fuel from the helicopters warming up on distant landing pads. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries occasionally piercing the steady drone of military vehicles and equipment being moved into position for the day's operations. Everything about the base spoke of lethal efficiency, from the precisely maintained buildings to the way personnel moved with purpose rather than haste, understanding that in their world, preparation and precision meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Behind those steel doors, Master Chief Petty Officer Jackson, Ironside, Kowalski was briefing his team on what would become the most dangerous extraction mission of their careers. The briefing room itself reflected the no-nonsense approach of America's most elite fighting force. Gray walls lined with tactical maps, communication equipment humming quietly in the background, and a large display screen showing satellite imagery of terrain that would challenge even the most experienced operators. Kowalski had earned his call sign during a firefight in Kandahar, where he'd taken shrapnel to both legs and still carried 3 wounded teammates to safety across 2 kilometers of hostile territory. At 42, with 17 years of special operations experience spanning 3 different combat theaters, he commanded respect through actions rather than words. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from squinting through rifle scopes and making split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. When Kowalski spoke, even the most experienced SEALs listened with absolute attention. "Gentlemen," his gravelly voice filled the briefing room as 12 elite SEALs studied satellite imagery on the main display. "Intelligence confirms that Captain William Ghost Morrison and his reconnaissance team have been compromised behind enemy lines in the Helmand province. Last contact was 18 hours ago, 2,347 hours local time. Their extraction window closes in 6 hours, after which enemy reinforcements will make recovery impossible." The men assembled around the tactical table represented decades of combined combat experience. Each had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments the military could offer, completing training that eliminated 90% of candidates and earning their place in a unit that operated beyond the reach of conventional military doctrine. They wore their equipment with the casual familiarity of craftsmen handling familiar tools, every piece positioned for maximum efficiency and instant access. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Sledge Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the terrain maps with the focused intensity that had made him the premier breacher in the unit. Rodriguez had successfully breached more hostile compounds than any operator in SEAL Team 6 history, earning his nickname from his preferred method of door entry: overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. His massive frame and scarred hands told the story of someone who'd spent years turning obstacles into opportunities through controlled violence and tactical thinking. "Terrain looks like a nightmare, Chief," Rodriguez observed, his finger tracing potential approach routes on the display. "Multiple elevation changes, limited cover, and intel suggests at least 24 hostiles between us and the target. Standard infiltration routes put us in the open for extended periods. Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas Viper Chun nodded in agreement. His snipers' eye already calculating sight lines, firing positions, and potential threats that could compromise the mission. Chun held the record for the longest confirmed kill in SEAL Team 6 history, a shot that had saved an entire convoy from ambush in the mountains of Afghanistan. His ability to read terrain and identify threats from impossible distances had kept his teammates alive through countless operations where death waited behind every rock and building. Approach routes are severely limited, Chun added, manipulating the display to show different angles of the target area. Any conventional extraction attempt puts us in a kill box for at least 4 minutes. That's too long in hostile territory, especially with wounded personnel to evacuate. The tactical challenge was obvious to everyone in the room. Ghost Morrison's team had been conducting deep reconnaissance when they'd encountered a superior enemy force and gone to ground in defensive positions. Their last transmission had indicated at least one wounded team member and ammunition running low. Standard extraction protocols called for helicopter insertion, but enemy anti-aircraft capabilities made that approach suicidal. Ground insertion meant fighting through established enemy positions with unknown casualties among America's most valuable military assets. Kowalski's expression remained stoic as he processed their assessment, his mind running through alternatives that all led to the same conclusion. This mission would require unconventional approaches and accepting risks that violated standard operating procedures. The stakes were clear: retrieve Ghost's team and return to base with 0 American casualties, or watch 4 elite operators become casualties of a war that had already claimed too many good people. Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Reaper Williams, the team's explosive ordnance specialist, studied chemical analysis reports from the target area. Williams had survived 3 IED explosions during his career, losing partial hearing in his left ear, but gaining an almost supernatural ability to detect explosive devices and booby traps. His expertise had saved countless lives by identifying threats that would have devastated conventional forces. Intelligence suggests enemy forces have had time to establish prepared positions, Williams noted, highlighting specific areas on the tactical display. They're not just searching for Ghost's team, they're preparing to defend against our extraction attempt. Whoever we're dealing with, they understand our capabilities and they're planning accordingly. Staff Sergeant Kevin Prophet Martinez, the team's communications specialist and cultural advisor, provided additional context that painted an even grimmer picture. Martinez had grown up in Texas speaking Spanish and Arabic, completing multiple tours as a liaison with indigenous forces before joining SEAL Team 6. His ability to understand enemy communications and cultural motivations had proven invaluable in operations where traditional intelligence failed to provide adequate context. Intercepted communications suggest this isn't a random enemy unit, Martinez explained. They're organized, well-equipped, and they know they have high-value targets trapped. They're willing to take casualties to prevent extraction, which means they understand the strategic importance of capturing or killing American Special Operations personnel. The implications hung heavy in the room. This wasn't simply a search and rescue operation. It was rapidly becoming a test of wills between America's most elite warriors and an enemy force that understood exactly what they were trying to prevent. Every hour that passed gave the enemy more time to reinforce their positions and expand their search pattern, but rushing into a trap would result in more casualties rather than fewer. Kowalski studied the faces of his men, reading the controlled tension that preceded dangerous operations. These warriors had volunteered for missions where death was a statistical probability rather than a remote possibility, but they'd also learned to trust their training, their equipment, and each other to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The question wasn't whether they could complete the mission, it was whether they could do so without acceptable losses. A sharp knock interrupted their tactical discussion, causing everyone in the room to look toward the door with barely concealed irritation. In the special operations community, interruptions during mission planning were rare and usually indicated either emergency developments or administrative interference. Given the time constraints they faced, neither possibility was welcome. "Enter," Kowalski called out, his voice carrying the edge that came from interrupted concentration. The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Commander Torres, standing at perfect attention with the kind of military bearing that suggested extensive training and high standards. Her appearance was immaculate, not a single thread out of place, boots polished to mirror shine, and her long dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow still looked effortlessly elegant. The contrast with the room full of battle-hardened warriors wearing tactical gear and face paint was immediately obvious to everyone present. In a briefing room where camouflage uniforms and equipment harnesses were standard attire, Torres's dress blues made her stand out like a recruitment poster brought to life. Her ribbons and decorations spoke of accomplishment and service, but they were the kind of awards that could be earned through administrative excellence rather than combat performance. To the assembled SEALs, she represented everything they'd learned to be suspicious of, someone who looked too clean, too perfect, too removed from the bloody realities of their profession. The briefing room fell silent as 12 pairs of eyes assessed the newcomer with the kind of clinical evaluation reserved for potential threats or obstacles. These men had spent years earning their place in the most elite fighting force in the military through blood, sweat, and performance under conditions that would break ordinary people. They'd lost friends, buried teammates, and survived situations where hesitation or incompetence meant death. To them, Torres represented an unknown quantity entering their carefully controlled environment at the worst possible moment. "Master Chief Kowalski," Torres said, her voice clear and professional despite the obvious tension in the room. "Lieutenant Commander Torres reporting as ordered, sir. I've been assigned as intelligence liaison for Operation Nightfall." Her words were precisely correct, delivered with the kind of military bearing that suggested extensive training and attention to detail. But in a room full of operators who communicated through shared experience and mutual trust earned under fire, formal military courtesy felt artificial and potentially problematic. Kowalski studied her for a long moment, his weathered face giving nothing away as he processed this unexpected development. He'd read her personnel file before she arrived, as was his practice with anyone assigned to support his operations. On paper, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Michelle Torres was exceptional. Naval Academy graduate, top 5% of her class, advanced degrees in linguistics and strategic intelligence, fluent in 7 languages, exemplary performance reviews across multiple assignments spanning 6 years of active duty service. Her academic credentials were impressive by any standard. The Naval Academy accepted only the highest achieving candidates, and graduating in the top 5% required intellectual capability, physical fitness, and leadership potential that few people possessed. Her advanced degrees suggested continued commitment to professional development, while her language skills indicated the kind of cultural awareness that proved valuable in modern military operations. But paper credentials didn't tell the complete story, and Kowalski had learned through bitter experience that academic achievement didn't necessarily translate to performance under combat conditions. The best intelligence officers he'd worked with had been those who understood the realities of ground-level operations, who could process information through the lens of tactical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "Intelligence liaison," Rodriguez muttered under his breath, his comment loud enough for others to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. "What's next? A photographer to document our technique for the history books?" A few chuckles rippled through the room, the kind of quiet laughter that served to release tension while establishing group dynamics. It wasn't necessarily hostile, but it clearly indicated skepticism about the value of adding an outsider to their carefully balanced team during a critical operation. Torres maintained her composure, but Kowalski caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she'd heard similar comments throughout her career. The reaction was subtle enough that most people would miss it, but Kowalski had spent years reading body language and micro-expressions that revealed information people tried to conceal. "Commander Torres," Kowalski said formally, deciding to address the situation directly rather than allow tension to build. "Welcome to Team 6. Your orders specify intelligence support for this operation. What's your combat experience?" It was a straightforward question that cut through military courtesy to address the fundamental issue that concerned everyone in the room. Combat experience was the currency of credibility in the special operations community, and no amount of academic achievement could substitute for proven performance under fire. "2 deployments, sir," Torres replied without hesitation. Afghanistan and Iraq. Intelligence gathering and analysis. Working embedded with forward operating units conducting reconnaissance and direct action missions. Her answer was precise and military, carefully crafted to convey relevant experience without revealing details that might be classified or sensitive. But it also left room for interpretation, and Kowalski recognized the diplomatic language that often concealed more than it revealed. Chun leaned back in his chair, a skeptical smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he processed her response. Embedded with which units, Commander? And what was your primary function during those deployments? The question carried an edge of challenge, demanding specificity that would either validate her claims or expose the limitations of her experience. In the special operations community, vague answers were often interpreted as attempts to inflate credentials or conceal inadequate preparation. Various special operations elements, Senior Chief, Torres replied, maintaining eye contact with Chun despite the obvious skepticism in his voice. My primary function was signal intelligence, communication intercepts, and tactical assessment of enemy capabilities and intentions. Again, her answer was technically accurate but deliberately vague, revealing enough information to demonstrate relevance while avoiding specifics that might compromise operational security. But to the assembled SEALs, it also suggested the kind of support role that kept people away from direct combat rather than placing them in positions where they had to make life-and-death decisions under fire. Signal intelligence, Rodriguez repeated with obvious disdain, his tone making it clear what he thought of such assignments. So you sat in air-conditioned trailers listening to radio chatter while real operators did the heavy lifting and took the risks. The comment was deliberately provocative, designed to either provoke a defensive response or force Torres to reveal more about her actual experience. It was also unfair. Signal intelligence was crucial to successful operations, and the specialists who provided it often worked under dangerous conditions to gather information that saved lives. But fairness wasn't the point. Rodriguez was testing her reaction to challenge and criticism. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as everyone waited to see how Torres would respond to direct confrontation. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, suggesting that Rodriguez's characterization stung, but her voice remained steady and professional when she replied. I performed my assigned duties to the best of my ability, Petty Officer Rodriguez, providing intelligence support that contributed to mission success and force protection. It was a diplomatic response that avoided escalation while defending her service record, but it also failed to address the underlying question about her combat experience, leaving the SEALs with the impression that she'd never been shot at, never had to make split-second decisions under fire, and never experienced the kind of stress that separated theoretical knowledge from practical capability. Kowalski intervened before the situation could escalate further, recognizing that continued confrontation would be counterproductive regardless of Torres's actual qualifications. Gentlemen, we have a mission to plan and time constraints that don't allow for extended discussions. Commander Torres, please provide your intelligence package on the target area and current enemy disposition. Torres opened her folder and approached the main display, activating a tablet that synchronized with the room's communication systems. New imagery appeared on the screen, detailed satellite photos, thermal scans, and communication intercepts that provided a significantly clearer picture of the operational environment than anything they'd seen in their initial briefing materials. The difference was immediately obvious to everyone in the room. While their original intelligence had been adequate for basic mission planning, Torres's package included details that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Enemy positions were marked with precision that suggested real-time surveillance. Terrain features were highlighted to show both opportunities and threats, and communication intercepts provided insight into enemy intentions and capabilities. Latest intelligence confirms Ghost's team is being held here, Torres said, pointing to a compound roughly 2 kilometers from their original position. Enemy strength is approximately 35 hostiles, not the 24 in your initial briefing. They've also established 3 checkpoint positions along the primary approach route, with interlocking fields of fire designed to channel attacking forces into prepared kill zones. The SEALs studied the new information with professional interest, Their skepticism about Torres's qualifications temporarily overshadowed by their recognition that this intelligence was significantly better than what they'd been working with. The updated enemy strength estimates alone could have prevented them from walking into a trap that might have resulted in casualties among America's most elite warriors. Intelligence sources for this assessment? Chen asked, his tone more professional now that Torres had demonstrated competence in her field. Multiple platforms, Senior Chief, Torres replied, manipulating the display to show overlapping coverage from different surveillance assets. Satellite imagery updated within the last 6 hours, signals intelligence from communication intercepts, and human intelligence from assets in the target area. The assessment is current and has been verified through multiple independent sources. Williams studied the updated tactical picture with the focused attention of someone whose life depended on accurate information. Commander, do we have intelligence on enemy explosive devices or booby traps in the target area? Affirmative, Torres replied, highlighting specific locations on the display. Intelligence suggests they've established IED positions along the most likely approach routes, consistent with standard enemy tactics for defending high-value targets. Additionally, thermal imaging indicates possible prepared positions that may include heavy weapons or anti-aircraft systems. The information was professionally presented and obviously valuable, but it also raised questions about why it hadn't been included in their original briefing materials. In the special operations community, intelligence failures often resulted from poor coordination between different agencies and units, leaving operators with incomplete pictures of threats they would face. Why wasn't this intelligence included in our original mission briefing? Kowalski asked, voicing the question that everyone was thinking. Torres hesitated for a moment before responding, and Kowalski recognized the pause that preceded politically sensitive explanations. Sir, this intelligence was compiled from sources that became available after your initial briefing. Some assets required additional time to position and establish surveillance, while others involved coordination between agencies that don't always share information in real time. It was a diplomatic way of acknowledging the bureaucratic failures that plagued modern military operations, where different agencies collected information but didn't always coordinate effectively to provide complete pictures to the people who needed them most. The problem was systemic and had resulted in operational failures that cost lives, but addressing it required political solutions rather than tactical adjustments. Current extraction options? Kowalski continued, focusing on actionable information rather than bureaucratic problems they couldn't solve. Limited, Master Chief, Torres admitted, her honesty providing credibility that flowery optimism would have undermined. Standard helicopter extraction puts the aircraft in a vulnerable position for too long. Enemy has at least 2 RPG positions and possibly a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. Vehicle extraction means fighting through 3 kilometers of hostile territory with wounded personnel and no guarantee that evacuation routes will remain secure. Her assessment matched their own analysis, confirming that this mission would require unconventional approaches and accepting risks that violated standard operating procedures. But it also demonstrated that she understood the tactical realities they faced rather than offering theoretical solutions that ignored practical constraints. So what do you recommend, Commander? Chen asked, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest in her tactical thinking. Torres studied the display for several seconds before responding, her finger tracing potential routes while her mind processed variables that included terrain, enemy capabilities, time constraints, and the physical condition of personnel they needed to extract. Diversionary assault on the eastern checkpoint draws enemy forces away from the compound where Ghost's team is being held, she finally said. Small team inserts from the west using this terrain feature for concealment, extracts Ghost's personnel, and exfiltrates to alternate pickup point here. She indicated a position 3 kilometers south of the compound, in terrain that provided helicopter access without exposing aircraft to enemy anti-aircraft positions. It was a sound tactical plan that demonstrated understanding of both conventional and unconventional warfare principles. The diversionary assault would draw enemy attention and resources away from the actual extraction, while the small team approach would minimize the profile and maximize mobility necessary for success in hostile territory. Rodriguez shook his head, his expression showing the skepticism that came from extensive combat experience. That plan puts the extraction team in hostile territory for over an hour. Too much exposure time. Too many variables that could go wrong, and no margin for error if Ghost's team is in worse condition than intelligence suggests. Alternative is a direct assault with significant casualties on both sides, Torres replied calmly, her tone suggesting that she'd considered and rejected conventional approaches for valid tactical reasons. Enemy forces are prepared for direct attack and positioned to inflict maximum casualties on any force attempting standard extraction protocols. At least direct assault is honest, Rodriguez muttered, though his voice carried less conviction than before. No fancy footwork, no clever tricks. Just superior firepower and better training against an enemy that understands conventional tactics. Kowalski could sense the growing tension between his team and the intelligence officer, but he could also see that Torres's recommendations were based on sound tactical thinking rather than theoretical knowledge. This wasn't unusual. Special operations units were naturally suspicious of outsiders, especially those who hadn't proven themselves in combat alongside the people whose lives would depend on their judgment. But something about Torres's demeanor suggested there was more to her story than her personnel file revealed. The way she handled tactical questions indicated experience that went beyond classroom training, and her calm response to challenge suggested someone who'd faced skepticism before and proven herself through performance rather than argument. Commander Torres, Kowalski decided, you'll observe from the Tactical Operations Center during mission execution, monitor communications, and provide real-time intelligence updates as necessary. Your tactical assessment will be incorporated into our final mission planning. Understood, sir. As the briefing concluded and the SEALs began their pre-mission preparations, Torres gathered her materials and headed toward the door. Behind her, she could hear the quiet conversations that always followed when outsiders left the room, voices that carried the kind of skepticism she'd encountered throughout her military career. Pretty face, but I doubt she's ever heard a shot fired in anger, someone said, the comment delivered in the tone of professional assessment rather than personal attack. Probably never been outside the wire without a full security detail and air support on standby. Another voice added, reflecting the assumption that intelligence officers were protected from the realities of ground combat. Hope she doesn't faint when the shooting starts, and we need accurate intelligence updates, a third voice observed, expressing concern about operational reliability under stress. Torres paused at the door but didn't turn around, having learned through experience that responding to such comments usually made situations worse rather than better. She'd heard variations of these assessments throughout her career, from her first assignment as a junior intelligence officer through her current position supporting elite units. At the Naval Academy, her classmates had whispered that she only made it through because the administration needed female success stories for recruitment purposes. During her first deployment, the assumption was that she'd been assigned to intelligence work to keep her away from dangerous assignments that might result in negative publicity if she became a casualty. Her second deployment brought slightly more respect, but always with the caveat that intelligence work wasn't real military service in the same way that combat operations were. What none of them knew, what her personnel file carefully omitted for operational security reasons, was that Lieutenant Commander Sarah Torres had requested every dangerous assignment she'd ever received. That her intelligence gathering had included 3 direct action missions where she'd carried a rifle alongside special operations personnel, conducting reconnaissance that required moving through hostile territory with no support except her training and equipment. She'd been decorated twice for actions that remained classified, including an incident where her quick thinking and cultural knowledge had prevented an ambush that would have resulted in casualties among soldiers who'd initially questioned her presence on their team. She'd volunteered for this assignment specifically because she was tired of watching operations from command centers while others took the risks and made the sacrifices that freedom required. Her tablet contained intelligence that she'd gathered personally during a reconnaissance mission that had placed her within 500 meters of the compound where Ghost's team was being held. The detailed enemy positions, the assessment of their capabilities, and the recommended extraction routes were based on direct observation rather than satellite imagery or communication intercepts. But revealing that information would compromise operational security and potentially endanger other intelligence assets operating in the area. 6 hours later, as the desert sun disappeared behind distant mountains, The mission launched exactly as planned. Ghost Team 1 departed the base in 3 modified Black Hawk helicopters, carrying Master Chief Kowalski and his 11 SEALs toward what intelligence predicted would be a straightforward extraction requiring superior firepower and tactical expertise to overcome determined enemy resistance. Torres monitored their progress from the Tactical Operations Center, a sophisticated facility that provided real-time communication with multiple operations while maintaining the security necessary for classified missions. The center hummed with quiet activity as specialists tracked friendly forces, monitored enemy communications, and coordinated support assets that might be required if the mission encountered unexpected complications. The main display showed the helicopters' progress as they flew low and fast across terrain that transitioned from relatively secure coalition-controlled areas to disputed territory, where enemy forces operated with increasing boldness. Satellite feeds provided real-time imagery of the target area, while communication intercepts allowed intelligence analysts to monitor enemy reactions to increased air activity. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. The helicopters reached their insertion point without detection. The SEALs deployed successfully into terrain that provided concealment while allowing rapid movement toward their target, and initial reconnaissance confirmed that the intelligence Torres had provided was accurate in all significant details. Ghost Morrison's team was confirmed alive and being held in the compound exactly where intelligence had predicted. Enemy forces were positioned as described, with checkpoint locations and defensive preparations matching the briefing materials. The diversionary assault plan appeared viable, and initial communications indicated that the extraction would proceed without major complications. Then everything went wrong in the space of 30 seconds. "Control, this is Ghost 1. Kowalski's voice crackled through the communication system, carrying the controlled tension that preceded combat reports. "We have enemy reinforcements approaching from the north. Estimated 2 companies, mechanized infantry with vehicle support. This intelligence was not in our briefing materials." Torres felt her stomach drop as she watched thermal imagery showing a convoy of vehicles approaching the target area from a direction that intelligence had assessed as secure. The convoy included troop transport vehicles, technical vehicles mounting heavy weapons, and what appeared to be armored personnel carriers that could provide both mobility and firepower far exceeding what the SEAL team was equipped to handle. Somehow, enemy forces had anticipated the rescue attempt and positioned additional units to trap the SEALs between their original defensive positions and fresh troops arriving with superior numbers and heavier weapons. The tactical situation had shifted from challenging to potentially catastrophic in less than a minute. "Ghost 1, you have multiple enemy vehicles approaching your position from grid reference 347 to 891. Recommend immediate extraction and mission abort." "Negative, Control," Kowalski replied, his voice carrying the determination that had made him legendary among special operations personnel. "We have visual on our personnel. They're alive, they're Americans, and we're not leaving without them." For the next 20 minutes, Torres watched helplessly as the situation deteriorated beyond anything that training or experience had prepared her to handle. The SEALs fought their way into the compound with the kind of coordinated violence that only elite units could execute, successfully locating and securing Ghost Morrison's team despite fierce resistance from defenders who'd been waiting for exactly this scenario. But the arrival of enemy reinforcements had created a tactical nightmare that threatened to overwhelm even the most capable operators through sheer numbers and superior firepower. The SEALs found themselves surrounded by vastly superior enemy forces, their planned extraction helicopters unable to approach due to heavy anti-aircraft fire, and their escape routes cut off by enemies who understood American tactics and had prepared accordingly. "Control, this is Ghost 1. We're pinned down at grid reference 341 to 627. Enemy has us surrounded on 3 sides with at least 60 combatants and vehicle-mounted weapons. Request immediate air support and alternate extraction plan." Torres studied the tactical display with growing urgency, her mind racing through possible solutions as she watched friendly forces markers surrounded by red indicators representing enemy positions. The SEALs were trapped in a defensive position with limited ammunition, at least 2 wounded personnel, including someone from Ghost's original team, and no clear escape route, that wouldn't require fighting through prepared enemy positions. Ghost 1, air support is en route. Estimate 20 minutes to target area. Copy, control. We'll try to hold position, but ammunition is running low and enemy forces are massing for a coordinated assault. Request priority handling for air support and any additional assets that might be available. 20 minutes was an eternity in combat time, especially for surrounded forces facing overwhelming odds. Torres could hear the strain in Kowalski's voice as he reported their situation with the kind of professional calm that came from years of experience, but couldn't completely conceal the severity of their predicament. The Tactical Operations Center had become a study in controlled tension as specialists worked frantically to coordinate support assets and develop alternatives that might save American lives. Air support was being diverted from other missions, additional helicopter assets were being prepared for emergency extraction, and intelligence analysts were reviewing every piece of information that might provide solutions to an increasingly impossible situation. But Torres had spent 2 years studying unconventional warfare tactics, and she'd noticed something in the satellite imagery that others had missed during their focus on conventional military solutions. A narrow ravine approximately 600 meters from the SEAL's position that connected to a larger valley system, barely visible in the thermal imaging because of its depth and the way shadows concealed its true dimensions. More importantly, Torres had identified this terrain feature during her personal reconnaissance mission 3 days earlier. She'd actually walked through portions of that ravine system, confirming that it provided concealed movement to an alternate extraction point that helicopters could reach without exposing themselves to enemy anti-aircraft positions. The ravine was too narrow for vehicles and would be difficult for large numbers of infantry to navigate effectively, but it offered a potential escape route that enemy forces might not anticipate or be able to exploit. The problem was communicating this information to the trapped SEALs and then somehow guiding them through terrain they'd never seen. In darkness, while under heavy enemy fire, carrying wounded personnel, and maintaining the kind of noise discipline necessary to avoid detection by pursuing forces. Control, this is Ghost 1. Enemy assault is beginning. We need options immediately, or this is going to end very badly for everyone involved. Torres looked around the Tactical Operations Center, watching specialists focus on their individual responsibilities while senior officers worked to coordinate conventional support assets that might not arrive in time to prevent a catastrophe. No one was considering unconventional solutions because military doctrine discouraged improvisation during active combat operations, especially when such improvisation might place additional personnel at risk. But 13 of America's finest warriors were about to die unless someone was willing to take calculated risks and make decisions that violated standard operating procedures. Torres made a choice that would either save lives or end her military career, possibly both. Ghost 1, this is Control. I have an alternate extraction route that bypasses enemy positions. Do you copy? Copy, Control. Send it immediately. Grid reference 338 to 624. There's a ravine system that leads southeast toward alternate extraction point. Narrow passage that provides concealment, but it bypasses enemy positions and leads to helicopter landing zone that's not covered by their anti-aircraft weapons. Control, that terrain feature is not on our maps. How do you know about this route? Torres hesitated for a fraction of a second, knowing that her next words would reveal information that was supposed to remain classified, but also knowing that honest communication was the only way to save lives. Detailed reconnaissance conducted 3 days ago, Ghost 1. The passage is confirmed passable and leads directly to secure extraction point. What she didn't say was that she'd conducted that reconnaissance personally, moving through hostile territory with only her equipment and training to gather intelligence that would support exactly this kind of emergency. Her presence in the area had been unauthorized by conventional standards, but it had been necessary to provide the kind of detailed information that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Control, we can't see this ravine from our current position. Enemy fire is too heavy for extended movement to locate terrain features that may or may not exist. Ghost 1, I can provide turn-by-turn navigation using real-time observation and communication guidance. Negative, Control. Communication delay and potential interference make voice guidance too risky with wounded personnel. We need someone with direct visual contact who can adapt to changing conditions in real time. Torres felt her heart racing as she realized what Kowalski was asking. He needed someone to physically guide them through the ravine system. Someone who could see the terrain directly, identify obstacles and threats as they developed, and serve as a forward observer and communication relay between the trapped SEALs and extraction helicopters. Someone who knew the route because they'd walked it before. Ghost 1, this is Control. I can provide a guide with direct knowledge of the terrain. Copy, Control. Who's available for immediate deployment? Torres took a deep breath before responding, knowing that her next transmission would either provide the solution that saved 13 American lives or create additional problems that made an impossible situation worse. This is Control. I'll guide you personally. The Tactical Operations Center fell silent as every person in the room turned to stare at Torres with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. The watch commander, a Navy captain with 25 years of experience, including multiple combat tours, stepped toward her communication position with an expression that suggested serious disciplinary action was imminent. Commander Torres, what did you just transmit? Sir, I offered to provide on-ground guidance to the extraction team. I know the terrain, I know the route, and I'm the only person available for immediate deployment who can guide them to safety. Absolutely not. You're an intelligence officer, not a combat operator. Stand down immediately and return to your assigned duties. But Torres was already moving, stepping away from her communication station and heading toward the equipment lockers where emergency gear was stored for exactly these kinds of situations. She'd made her decision based on tactical necessity rather than military protocol, and she wasn't going to let bureaucratic concerns prevent her from saving American lives. Sir, 13 SEALs are about to die unless someone guides them through that ravine system. I know the terrain because I've been there personally. I know the route because I've walked it before. And I'm the only person in this facility who can get them out alive. Commander, I'm ordering you to return to your station immediately. Torres paused at the equipment locker, her hand on the door handle as she considered following orders and returning to watch 13 of America's finest warriors die because military protocol prevented unconventional solutions to desperate situations. Instead, she opened the locker and began pulling out tactical gear that would allow her to operate in hostile territory. Sir, with respect, my oath is to defend this nation and the personnel serving it. Those men need help that only I can provide, and I'm qualified to provide it. The watch commander's face flushed with anger as he realized that Torres was prepared to violate direct orders to pursue what she considered her duty. Commander Torres, you are not qualified for combat operations. Return to your station immediately or face court-martial charges for insubordination and endangering military personnel. Torres continued gearing up, strapping on body armor that had been fitted for her during previous training exercises and checking her sidearm with the automatic precision that came from extensive practice. Sir, my personnel file shows 2 combat deployments and advanced training with special operations units. I'm as qualified as anyone available for immediate deployment. What she didn't mention was that her training with special operations units had included 2 weeks with Force Reconnaissance Marines, learning advanced reconnaissance and survival techniques that went far beyond standard intelligence officer requirements. She'd requested that training specifically because she wanted to understand the challenges faced by the operators she supported and because she'd already decided that her career would involve taking calculated risks to save American lives rather than watching from command centers while others made the ultimate sacrifice. Ghost 1, this is Control, Torres transmitted as she finished her equipment check, ignoring the heated discussion taking place behind her. Guide is en route to your position. Estimate 12 minutes to link-up point. Copy, Control. We'll hold position and wait for guide. What's your experience level for this type of operation? Torres paused before responding, knowing that her answer would either inspire confidence or create additional doubts about a plan that represented their only hope for survival. Ghost 1, I've completed advanced reconnaissance training and I know this terrain personally. I'll get you home. Before the watch commander could physically stop her, Torres headed toward the exit, leaving behind a wake of heated discussions about protocol violations, chain of command, and potential court-martial charges. But she also heard something else. Quiet voices running preliminary calculations for helicopter extraction at the alternate site she'd identified and communication specialists establishing backup frequencies for maintaining contact during the operation. 8 minutes later, Torres was aboard a helicopter racing toward the most dangerous mission of her career. The aircraft flew low and fast, using terrain features to avoid enemy detection while approaching the area where 13 elite warriors were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. As they neared the target area, she could see muzzle flashes and explosions in the distance, marking the location where America's most elite fighting force was making their stand against superior numbers. "Control, this is Rescue 1. The helicopter pilot transmitted, his voice carrying the controlled tension that came from flying into hostile territory. "Approaching drop zone. Recommend fast insertion and immediate departure. Area is extremely hot, with heavy enemy activity. Rescue 1, cleared for insertion. Drop zone is confirmed as safe as possible under current conditions." Torres checked her equipment one final time as the helicopter settled into a hover above a small clearing approximately 1,000 meters from the SEAL's position. The door gunner gave her a thumbs up, and she fast roped to the ground with the kind of fluid precision that comes from extensive training and absolute focus on mission accomplishment. As soon as her boots hit the ground, the helicopter departed, leaving her alone in hostile territory with only her training, her equipment, and her determination to guide 13 warriors to safety. The sound of gunfire was much louder now, punctuated by explosions that marked enemy attempts to overrun the SEAL's defensive position. "Ghost 1, this is your guide. I'm on the ground and moving to your position. Copy, guide. We're taking heavy fire, but holding position. Move fast and stay low." Torres began moving through the darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate toward the sound of gunfire while avoiding enemy patrols that were moving to reinforce their assault on the trapped Americans. She'd studied this terrain extensively during her reconnaissance mission, but experiencing it under combat conditions was entirely different from peaceful observation. The ground was rougher than satellite imagery had suggested, covered with loose rocks and unexpected obstacles that could easily cause injury in darkness. Enemy forces were more active than intelligence had predicted, with patrol elements moving through areas that should have been secure. Every step required balancing speed against stealth, mission accomplishment against personal survival. But she'd also trained for exactly this kind of movement: low-profile navigation through hostile territory, using minimal equipment and maximum situational awareness. Her training with force reconnaissance had included night infiltration exercises that prepared her for precisely these conditions, while her previous reconnaissance mission had given her intimate knowledge of terrain features that provided concealment and safe passage. 12 minutes later, she reached the SEAL's defensive position, approaching from an angle that allowed friendly forces to identify her without exposing herself to enemy fire. Master Chief Kowalski looked up as she slid into their perimeter, his expression shifting from surprise to grim acceptance as he realized their guide was the intelligence officer his team had questioned earlier that day. "You're our guide?" he asked, having to shout over the sound of gunfire and explosions. "Yes, Master Chief. I know the way to the extraction point." Kowalski studied her for a moment, noting the way she moved, her equipment handling, and her apparent comfort under fire. This wasn't the same intelligence officer who'd stood in his briefing room 12 hours earlier. Under combat conditions, she carried herself like someone with real experience, someone who belonged in this environment. "All right, Commander. We've got 4 wounded, limited ammunition, and enemy forces massing for a final assault. How do we get out of here?" Torres pointed toward a barely visible depression in the terrain, using hand signals to communicate over the noise of combat. "The ravine starts approximately 500 meters southeast of this position. It's narrow and challenging, but it leads directly to an alternate extraction point that helicopters can reach without exposing themselves to enemy anti-aircraft fire." "How do you know about this route?" "I've walked it before, Master Chief. Every step of it." Senior Chief Chen moved closer, wincing from a shrapnel wound in his left shoulder while maintaining security watch toward enemy positions. "Ma'am, that ravine isn't on any of our maps. How can you be certain it leads where you think it does?" Torres met his gaze directly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Because I've traced it through multiple reconnaissance missions and confirmed the route using direct observation." The ravine connects to a valley system that leads directly to grid reference 335 to 618, which is clear helicopter access and no enemy anti-aircraft positions. Rodriguez looked skeptical despite their desperate situation, his doubt evident even as bullets impacted nearby cover. Even if the ravine exists, moving wounded personnel through unknown terrain in darkness while under enemy fire is extremely dangerous. More dangerous than staying here to fight two companies of enemy forces with limited ammunition? Torres replied calmly, her tone carrying the confidence that came from knowledge rather than bravado. Kowalski made the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. She's right. We can't hold this position much longer, and conventional extraction is impossible. We move in 3 minutes. Guide leads, I'll bring up the rear. Everyone else maintains interval and watches for enemy contact. As the SEALs prepared to move, Torres felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. 13 elite warriors were trusting her navigation skills and terrain knowledge with their lives. If she was wrong about the ravine, if her reconnaissance had missed something critical, if the route proved impassable or led to a trap, all of them would die in hostile territory far from home. But she wasn't wrong. She'd spent hours studying every aspect of this terrain because that's how she approached every mission, with obsessive attention to detail and contingency planning that went beyond standard requirements. Her reconnaissance hadn't been casual observation. It had been systematic analysis of every rock, every depression, every possible obstacle that might interfere with emergency movement. Ghost 1, this is your guide. Route confirmed and ready to move. Copy guide. Lead the way and get us home. Torres led them through the darkness, using her night vision equipment to identify safe footing and clear passages while maintaining the kind of noise discipline that meant the difference between successful infiltration and enemy contact. Behind her, the SEALs moved with practiced stealth, carrying their wounded teammates and maintaining security despite their desperate situation and dwindling ammunition supplies. The enemy hadn't anticipated their movement toward the ravine, having positioned most forces to intercept conventional escape routes that led toward known helicopter landing zones. Torres's unconventional route selection had created an opportunity that standard military planning might have missed, exploiting enemy assumptions about American tactics to create space for escape. 25 minutes later, they reached the ravine. Torres had been correct. It was narrow, challenging, and virtually invisible from most directions, but it provided concealed movement toward the alternate extraction point she'd identified during her reconnaissance mission. This is it, she whispered to Kowalski, using hand signals to supplement quiet voice communication. Single file movement. Watch for loose rocks and steep sections. The passage opens into a wider valley approximately 800 meters ahead. For the next hour, Torres guided 13 SEALs through terrain that tested everyone's endurance and navigation skills to their absolute limits. The wounded warriors were carried by their teammates, equipment was redistributed to accommodate mobility limitations, and everyone pushed beyond normal physical limits to reach safety before enemy forces could organize pursuit. But Torres had been right about everything. The ravine led exactly where her analysis had predicted, opening into a valley with clear helicopter access and no enemy presence. Her reconnaissance had been thorough and accurate. Her route selection had been tactically sound, and her guidance had been precise enough to navigate wounded personnel through challenging terrain without additional casualties. By the time they reached the extraction point, air support had arrived and secured the area, allowing safe extraction of all personnel without further combat. The helicopters that lifted them to safety carried 13 American warriors who would return to fight another day, rather than body bags that would have represented a devastating loss to America's most elite fighting force. As the helicopters climbed toward safety, Master Chief Kowalski looked at Torres with an expression she'd never seen before. Complete respect from a warrior who'd earned the right to judge others based on performance under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Commander Torres, he said over the helicopter noise, his voice carrying genuine gratitude and professional acknowledgement. I owe you an apology for my initial assessment. And I owe you my life, along with the lives of 12 other people who are going home because of your courage. Just doing my job, Master Chief. No, ma'am. You did a lot more than your job tonight. You risked your career and your life to save people who doubted your qualifications and questioned your presence. That's not duty. That's the kind of courage that separates real warriors from everyone else. Rodriguez, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect, added his own assessment. Ma'am, I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. You've got more grit than most people I've served with, and that's saying something in this unit. Chen nodded in agreement, his wounded arm immobilized, but his voice strong. Commander, you've earned your place among operators tonight. Anyone who questions that can answer to us. 6 hours later, back at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, Torres faced a formal inquiry into her conduct during the mission. The watch commander had filed charges of insubordination, violation of direct orders, and endangering military personnel through unauthorized actions that violated established protocols and chain of command procedures. The inquiry panel consisted of senior officers who understood both the importance of military discipline and the complexities of combat operations where split-second decisions determined life and death outcomes. They'd reviewed preliminary reports of the mission, but they needed detailed testimony to understand exactly what had occurred and whether Torres's actions warranted disciplinary action or commendation. But before the inquiry could proceed with formal questioning, Master Chief Kowalski entered the conference room where Torres awaited the proceedings. Behind him came 12 SEALs, each wearing dress blues and combat decorations that represented years of service in the world's most dangerous conflicts. Their presence was unusual for a disciplinary hearing, but their request to provide testimony had been approved by the commanding officer. Sirs, Kowalski addressed the inquiry panel with the kind of formal military bearing that carried special weight coming from someone with his reputation and experience. We're here to provide testimony regarding Commander Torres's actions during Operation Nightfall. For the next 90 minutes, 13 of America's most elite warriors provided detailed accounts of how Torres's navigation skills, terrain knowledge, and personal courage had saved their lives when conventional military solutions would have resulted in catastrophic casualties. They described her professional competence under fire, her thorough mission preparation, and her willingness to risk everything to ensure their safe return. Their testimony painted a picture of someone who demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and courage that the military sought to develop in its officers. Rather than following safe protocols that would have resulted in American deaths, she'd made calculated decisions based on superior knowledge and accepted personal risks to achieve mission success. Senior Chief Chun, his arm still in a sling from his combat wound, concluded the testimony with words that carried special meaning in the special operations community. Sirs, Commander Torres displayed the kind of professional competence and personal courage that we've learned to respect in our community. She earned her place among warriors last night, and we're honored to serve alongside her. Rodriguez added his perspective as someone who'd initially questioned her qualifications. Sirs, I was wrong about Commander Torres's capabilities. She demonstrated tactical knowledge, physical courage, and leadership under pressure that meets the highest standards of our profession. Anyone who serves with her in the future will be fortunate to have that opportunity. The inquiry was dismissed without further proceedings. All charges against Torres were dropped, and her actions were classified as exemplary performance under extreme circumstances that demonstrated initiative, courage, and professional competence worthy of recognition rather than punishment. 3 weeks later, Torres received orders to her new assignment, Permanent Liaison Officer to SEAL Team 6, with additional duties including advanced reconnaissance training and special operations planning. The orders were signed by the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, who noted that her exceptional performance during combat operations demonstrates the kind of leadership and courage that distinguishes elite military personnel from ordinary service members. More importantly, when she reported to her new assignment, Master Chief Kowalski introduced her to his team with words that carried special meaning in the special operations community, words that officially welcomed her into a brotherhood that few people ever earned the right to join. Gentlemen, I want you to meet Commander Torres. She's proven herself under fire. She's saved American lives through personal courage and professional competence, and she's earned her place in this unit through performance that meets our highest standards. Anyone who has questions about her qualifications can discuss them with me personally. There were no questions. The woman they'd once dismissed as a pretty face with no grit had proven that courage comes in many forms, that real warriors are measured by their actions under pressure rather than their appearance in dress uniforms, and that the military's greatest strength comes from recognizing and developing excellence wherever it appears. From that day forward, whenever young officers questioned whether they belonged in special operations units, whenever someone suggested that intelligence officers weren't real military personnel, whenever anyone implied that courage was measured by physical appearance rather than strength of character, the story of Commander Torres became required reading in leadership courses and professional development programs. Because sometimes the person who saves everyone is the one nobody expected to fight. And sometimes real courage looks like a pretty face with lip balm in her pocket, proving that grit isn't about appearance. It's about what you do when everything depends on your next decision.